You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 2, Happiness is Around the Corner. I'm Bruce Philp. Thanks for listening. Well, it's the middle of January here in the Great White North, and if you're anything like me, you are climbing the walls missing your bike. I know I am. And if you're in the same predicament, you might especially enjoy this episode, because we're going to take a little trip to California, in our minds at least. So stay tuned for that. But before we get started, a bit of business. I want to acknowledge the promotional support of my pals at Eat, Sleep, Ride. The stories in these podcasts are about riders like you and me, and Eat, Sleep, Ride's a great place to find them. You can discover this online community and magazine at eatsleepride.com. And we'll get to meet the founders and talk about a safety innovation called Crashlight in a later episode. In the meantime, thanks for the boost, guys. Okay, let's go. There's a road near where I live that attracts riders from all over the region. It would probably be too short to be worth the trip if it weren't also in some pretty countryside. But it's the highlight of a lot of rides around here because of the number and variety of turns that are crammed into its 18 kilometers. Like any old road that follows a river, it's way more interesting than anything a modern highway engineer might build. I go there a lot, just for the practice. There's one turn on that road that always catches my breath a little, and not because it's the most difficult. No, what gets me about it is a skid mark, a single long streak of rubber on the asphalt that approaches the turn and then continues straight off the road. Somebody on a bike had a bad day there, and you just know that it was a mental error, the kind of momentary lapse any of us can have. There's something slightly spooky about the fact that the rain never seems to wash that mark away. For most riders, nothing is more fun than a corner, and nothing is more demanding. Almost half the time a rider gets in trouble, there's not even another vehicle involved. And most of those situations happen when we're simply trying to change direction. And yet we love it. I don't know about you, but for me, what makes a twisty road so seductive is that cornering on a motorcycle seems almost supernatural. I mean, I've read enough stuff to understand the physics. I know what countersteering is, and I know what camber thrust is, and I mostly get the theory. It's just that it doesn't make any sense. And I'm sure this goes away with time. But for me, every corner is still a war between my brain and my instincts. If I want to go right, I have to turn left. If I enter a corner too fast, I should lean over some more. If I'm worried about hitting something, I shouldn't look at it. Don't get me wrong, I can make my bike go more or less where I want it to go, but it just doesn't feel natural yet. To talk some more about that, I decided to lean on a guy named Todd Eagan. I met Todd a couple of years ago when I tried to raise my miserable cornering game with some coaching from this former pro racer at his place in Malibu, California. Todd learned to ride at the age of 4, and he's racked up well over 1 million miles on motorcycles. Besides his racing career, he's run his own track school, he's contributed to Cycle World magazine, and today he divides his time between being the country's foremost Moto Guzzi tuner, stunt and precision riding for brands like Indian Motorcycle, and providing tour support, renting bikes, and coaching riders through his own company, Ride Malibu. I'm headed back there this winter for some more schooling, so I thought maybe he'd be willing to share a secret or two with me on the phone just to kind of prime the pump. He was, and it turns out there's a lot more and a little bit less to this than just physics and theory. Here's our conversation. Hey, Todd.
Hi there.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
Thanks for coming on the show. Can I call it a show if it's only had one episode before this one? Is that legit, or let's call it a show?
Oh, okay.
So anyway, thanks again for coming on. So as you know, I want to talk about, the magical art of getting around a corner. And I before we get into that, I wanted to sort of dive into a certain memory that I have of a bit of time that we spent together a couple years ago. And you'll probably think this sounds, a bit silly, but I'm new enough at this that it's all still kind of magic to me. So it goes like this. We were done our coaching session, which I'm sure was too short by about a week. And we were heading back to your place. And so you were riding ahead of me. And you were on a big Moto Guzzi Stelvio, as I recall. So it's like a 600-pound bike. and we came up to
Yes.
sort of a very tight blind corner, and you just leaned that thing over like a MotoGP machine and disappeared around that corner as if the laws of physics did not apply to you. And I remember thinking at the time, how the hell is he doing that? And I have to say that in the time since then, um, when I've had a puckering moment going around a corner, that thought comes back to me. How the hell is he doing that? And how the hell do I do that? I've kind of read everything I can get my hands on, but to kind of hear it from, the sort of the other side of mastery feels like it would be something I'd not be the only writer in the world who'd be keen on. So I guess we'll get to that, but I wanted to start with just getting to know you a little bit better. I read in your bio that you started writing at 4 years old. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
And how did that? What were you writing it for?
So, long story, I'll condense it down. So, I'm the third generation writer in my family. My grandfather, my mom's dad, my mom rode, and apparently at an age earlier than I can recall, I was being set on motorcycle gas tanks and ridden around quite literally in diapers. And my grandfather, being a commercial electrician by trade, loved motorcycles. Obviously, that's where I get it from. But he, on weekends, would use his garage as a service shop for all the friends of the neighborhood. And a friend of his owed him a favor for some job that he did, and in trade, they traded him teaching me how to ride. So at that age, Honda made quite a few motorcycles, but it was the first vehicle that they made that was a manual clutch 3-speed, and it was called a Honda MR50. So I'm not sure if they were brought into Canada or not, but they sure were pretty plentiful down here back in that day. So that's what it was, a Honda MR50.
That's awesome. But it sort of raises a question for me. Like, I read these books and I listen to experts and they say, counter steer and lean and this and that. How do you teach that to a 4-year-old, or is it completely instinctive?
I want to say that a lot of it, because just over the years and being around other people and riders, clearly it's hereditary and instinctive in some capacity. But how I recall the teaching session going was pretty simple. He put me in a very large dirt field, and he kind of just explained. I didn't shift any. He just explained the clutch engagement to me, and I recall stalling it probably 50 times. But then once we got going, he just had me ride in a circle, basically. And then he would tell me how to stop it, and again, I recall falling over 50 times. And then he'd pick me up and put me in the other direction, and we'd go again. And, I'm sure that only lasted an hour, but it felt like an entire day to me, even by memory to date. And then he would then proceed just to do a lot of, frequent start-stops in straight line. And then that was the beginning of it.
So fast forward to you had a pretty solid racing career years later, and clearly as part of that experience, you must have had professional coaching. How does somebody work with a rider who learned from a kind of virtual, in animal state? How does somebody deconstruct what that person knows and turn them into skills?
Yeah, so I guess where kind of irony comes in. I actually was never taught, so it was just all instinctive and watching other riders and, School of Hard Knocks, just figuring it out on my own. And again, just racing teaches you a lot. So, your acceleration curve as far as, or your learning curve accelerates at such a rate, and having that, kind of part of your being at a very early age kind of, definitely brings you up to speed quickly and teaches you quickly. So that's kind of it. I mean, I wish I had something better to say about it. Just a lot of seat time. You'll probably hear that phrase, or maybe have read it many times, but it's just seat time, seat time, seat time. That's what does it.
Yeah, I get that, and I've been sort of trying to practice that myself. But boy, there sure is you have these breakthrough moments, but you can fall into the habit of just repeating the same mistakes over and over until they become kind of etched into your brain. And
Yes.
clearly that's not a mistake. That's not a mistake that you made. So as I think I read, you have like more than 1 million miles under your belt. You've
Yes.
clearly watched a lot of guys go around corners, either in anger or or on the street. What
Yes.
separates the naturals from the guys who just never quite get there?
I think in watching people over the years, a lot of the instinct can definitely come from something as simple as bicycle riding, kind of the physics of getting vehicles around. And in fact, one of the things that I like to do myself frequently, especially in the hills here, as you know, being here, I will actually shut the motor off on a big long curvy downhill and just coast down it, because of that teaches you a lot of the physics of riding, not relying on a motor per se to get you around a corner. So to answer your question, I think that the biggest flaws in a person that's starting at, even if they start riding at 16 years old, probably one of the worst mistakes, and I might get a lot of flack on this, but one of the worst mistakes that you can do is pick up a book and start reading on the physics, or there's a lot of well-known books out there by now, fairly famous people that teach you, or want to teach you, the practical or logical side of riding as it gets applied, in a physical standard in physics. And that is something that I think I touched on with you when you were here. Everyone has their own style. Everyone has their own comfort level. And if you watch the top form of racing currently, MotoGP, to take the top 10 riders, all top 10 riders have a very unique style. And so it works for them. So reading in on a book on, the physics of how to ride fast or whatever that may be, I see people on the street want to hang off the bike. And, there's a practical side to that on the racetrack. On the street, kind of really, it's a waste of time and energy, and it doesn't make for a great street rider. So to go back to your question you asked, what makes the difference? Someone who's just willing to understand the flow and take the time to learn what the bike does, and every bike is different. So I don't know if that answers it, but
yeah, well, it's kind of it kind of is a liberating thought, because I'm one of those guys who, I started late in life, and I tried to make up for what I hadn't done by doing lots of reading, and that's kind of how my mind works. I kind of, I start with logic and principle, and then work outwards to practice. And I have found that cornering is this constant fight between your instincts and your mind. And the hardest thing for me to get through my head was stuff like when you lean a bike over, the contact patch gets bigger, not smaller. The whole concept of counter steering, like the whole thing seems magic to me. It does not seem like physics as I understand them. And maybe too much reading has been the problem. Have you seen a better path? I know you said that seat time is, above all is the key. But I'm fascinated by this self-teaching process, because that's the thing I'm going through, and I bet every rider out there who cares about what he's doing is in the same position. What do I do? What do I do when I put the kickstand up and head for a twisty road and try to get better at this?
Yeah, so the sequence to do it on is definitely find a road to start with that you're very comfortable and knowledgeable with. So, if it's a curvy road by your house and it's something that you've driven on a substantial amount of time, all the better. And where that comes into it is that knowing the road is a big part. You commented on the corner when I went past you and went through. I've probably been through that corner 50,000 times. So I know entrance speeds, I know exit speeds, and I know the limitations of my bike. So when you know the limitations of the bike, you can very quickly get to there if you chose. Now, I know what that looked like to you as you described it. For me, that was on a 10 scale, is probably around a 6 of just, getting the bike through the corner. So everything's kind of relative, and certainly when you're starting out, watching experienced people can be, fascinating, and it can be frustrating all at the same time. So, yeah, that's kind of it. So when you're trying to learn it, yes, the answer is just seat time. It's just practice, practice, practice. And if you're just trying to figure out or learn, the limitations of your bike, I mean, certainly track days, really relaxed track days can be a huge benefit to you as long as it's a teaching track school, meaning there's quite a few fairly cheap, if I'll say that, track schools, at least here in Southern California, where there's a lot of people on the track and it's barely organized, and then you just get out there and go around the track. No one's really watching over your carrying, and closing speeds are substantial, and that in those situations you spend more time worrying about who's behind you than what you're doing. So there are a couple good schools that are, like I said, more relaxed, not set things. I can say one, California Superbike School. They have a certain aspect, and some people get some things out of those, while other people get nothing out of it. So that would be one that I would say as a street rider might not do you a lot of good. But track days, again, just bring you up on the limitations of your bike and getting you comfortable with lean angles and speed, and then that can be brought back and used on the street.
That's interesting. You mentioned the bike. I mean, how much is the bike? I know that if we were having an anonymous conversation on an internet forum, you would probably tell me that a good rider can make any bike go around a corner fast. But you got to the point of the limitations of the bike pretty quick. How important an element is that in the equation?
What's fascinating to me. So I was a child of the 70s. But even then, you look at, the motorcycles of the 70s, and in modern time, technologically speaking, I mean, they had, really poor tires and really poor suspension. Most of the big bikes were very heavyweight. But yet in that period of racing and American racing, I mean, there were some people that learned how to make those bikes go extremely quickly. And it's also astonishing to me to this day that if you ride a 1970s bike, of how well they actually work. Now, compared to modern bikes, yeah, there's light years difference between the two. But and how that applies to your question is that it really doesn't matter on the bike. I mean, if you're just talking about street riding, limitations of the bike or whatever bike you're on, and knowing your bike and knowing the road, or what equates to going down the road safely and as quickly as you choose to.
Yeah, I get off sometimes after a practice ride, and I look at my chicken strips, and I say to myself, "Boy, it felt like I was right on the edge, but it looks like I had an inch and change to go."
Sure.
How do you tell what the limit is without crashing it?
Yeah. So again, apply that to track days. What you'll learn, or even you may have in what time that we spent riding, is that a bike is, and you probably even read this, the bike can go through a corner much quicker with so much more lean angle than I'd say most newer riders can comprehend. So to get you there, I go back to track days. What that will teach you is, you'll be in a corner and you'll have someone. Well, you'll think you're going about as fast as you can, and you'll have someone either come around you to the outside, and I've done this on my track days where I have a passenger that I'm showing lines to, and I can go around the outside, of a newer rider with, two up. So what that all I guess I'm trying to get to is that doing that in a kind of controlled environment to where the corner. The corner's going to be the same every time. There's not going to be gravel or antifreeze or whatever else on the ground. And it just teaches you, each time you can pick up a little more speed, and with speed comes lean angle. If you want to kind of do that on your own, a good practice drill to do, but crashing is always a big element of this, is just find, a huge paved parking lot. And, the circle routine is a good one, to where you just, ride in one direction comfortably, and increase your speed. And then it's a simple thing that, if you're from a scientifical side of it, then you can ride around. You can even mark your tire if you wanted to, and you can ride around and see where you got to. That's kind of the practical, easy side of learning it. But track days have proven invaluable to that kind of thing. And once you get comfortable at that point, then, a practical side like we did on the street becomes even more important, because there's a definite breakdown being a street rider. One is obviously knowing your bike and being comfortable with it, its speeds. And then the second part of that equation is learning how to really read the road and knowing what, speeds you can comfortably go on it, because number one, the limitations of your bike, but just being able to read the road, read the signs, and then you developed a good instinct of it. Now, thankfully, I have had, as I've been told, that I have a pretty natural talent and ability to do it, to go very quickly down roads that I've never been on. But again, that just pulls all of the learning that I've had behind me, all the miles, all the seat time, all the miles, all the racing, everything behind me to do it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
yeah, absolutely. Well, and I guess it all ends up back at seat time.
Yes.
The time we spent together, the thing that stuck with me, and this is going to sound ridiculous to experienced riders, but it was a total face-palming moment of discovery that I actually have to use a cornering line, or I can. I knew what a line was because I'd raced cars. But I was so focused on maintaining my lane position that it never occurred to me that I could do the same thing on a bike. And you may not have appreciated this that day, but to me that was a breakthrough. Like, my whole next season was a different ballgame. Is that a common mistake?
I would definitely say yes. And it's something that, as when I ran my track school, kind of the first things we talk about, especially in the track environment, is the line. Probably much like you learned on your first track day, or in whatever means you can. But yes, there are. And then the beauty of it, or, I'll call it the beauty of it. The beauty of it is, on a bike, is that on a car, you're certainly limited to the painted lines on the road, and the width of the car. Where on a bike, you're literally, 4 times the width, meaning the bike's 25% less as wide as the car. So you can make, that line per se can change. But yes, I think that's a definite, light bulb popping session for many. Yes.
It sure was for me. And then the other thing that I discovered on my own, and again, this is available for people who read books, I guess, too, but the thing I discovered on my own is that if you're going to make a mistake, you're better to apex late than early, which was just another counterintuitive thing about this whole process for me. Is that so? That's what I think I learned. Is that true?
That's definitely true. So I think a lot of the major motorcycle magazines, at least here in the States, and I'm very good friends with a lot of the editors that have taught it over the years. But yeah, a late apex is just, gives you more runoff room. If the corner, if you're going into a blind corner and it's a decreasing radius turn, which is probably the turn that causes the most problem for everyone, especially if it's blind. The later that you apex, the more room that you have at the exit. And, a lot of people thinking that or hearing this might say, well, how does that really apply? Well, if you carry too much speed in and you apex early, which means you're going to be carrying too much speed on your exit, will 9 out of 10 times put you into the oncoming lane if it's a 2-lane road. So, apexing late lets you shed a little more speed, hopefully, up until the point of turn-in, and when it does, it gives you, an immense amount of more time and space on exit.
Yeah, which makes complete logical sense, and it intuitively doesn't make any sense at all. Like, I'm puddling along going, okay, if I start early, I'll have more time to fix the problem if I have one. And of course, that's completely inaccurate.
Right. No, I think if you've probably read this as well, a big part of that in most sessions is, as far as safe street riding goes, I think that you will hear that over and over and over again, is to just there's the ideal racing line, and then there's the street line. And the street line is always a much later apexing, even in a corner you can see through. It's just the safer, better way to go, for the simple reason too of that a lot of any vehicles that are over the center line, generally, if you're doing it as in a street line, you generally will be, especially on the on the exit is where it bites most people. So if people tend to hug a center line or run over a center line as they come into a corner, it will just pad that distance that you have. So
that makes sense. So here's one for you. I bet you can't. I bet you don't even have an answer, because I think it might just be magic. Why does it work to look where you want to go?
Yeah, that's a big one, right? It's a big one for everyone. What you learn, especially as your speed increases, at slower speeds, it's obviously important. Well, it's kind of something that you want to teach yourself and learn to do. And what the sense is if you've read this or not, you learn to rely on your peripherals, your vision, to kind of get you through, the nearest thing. If you focus in front of you, and maybe you can answer this, if you find yourself looking straight down at the closer ahead of the bike when you ride, most people that tend to do that have a tighter grip, and they don't. It really limits their speed, because your vision is what's controlling your trajectory. So if that's the case, if you're focused 10 feet in front of you, well, then your brain's only going to let you go as fast as the next 10 feet will take you. But if you look 30 feet down the road, or 50 feet, or 100 feet, I think if you haven't had this moment yet, you will. But the minute that you realize, even if you go ride the same corner and practice it, look 10 feet in front of the bike, and the next time look 50 feet, and then the next time look 100. And I think what you'll find in each increase in distance that you look, you'll feel like you're going slower and slower and slower, even if you hold the same speed. If you went through a 30-mile-an-hour corner and you look 10 feet in front of you, you're going to feel like you're doing 60. And every large distance that you go out, you'll feel that it goes slower and slower and slower. So that's the physical side of that answer. And then the more applied definition is that the further you look ahead, the more safety margin that your brain is being fed that you're getting. Because if I go into a corner and I'm looking down, and 50 feet ahead is, here in California, it could be a huge rock, then I'm riding in a reactionary fashion, as opposed to if, as I'm going into the corner, I see a rock 100 feet away, that allows me to ride in a more relaxed pace or sense, and mentally speaking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I remember this from cars too. That you can collect more information in your peripheral vision than you actually can in your central vision, and a key thing to learn is to trust it, just exactly as you say. That makes total sense to me. I do most of my riding in the country, and so there's always like sand and pickup trucks and animals and, recycling boxes being blown around in the wind and stuff like that. So if I'm not forcing myself to do what you just said, I fall into exactly that trap. I look 20 feet ahead and I end up slowing down.
Yes. Yeah. So yes, that whole application, and in racing, in a racing or even track situation, I think that most people are quite shocked when they realize just how far that you can look and safely and successfully and very quickly go through a corner. I'm sure you've seen photographs of, road racers to where the bike's leaned over, their knees hard on the ground and their head is turned 90 degrees to the direction of what the bike is facing.
Yeah.
So if you've seen that, they're doing exactly what we're talking about. They're just using their peripheral to collect, all the data. And the beauty about the track, again and again, the more we talk about it, and I'll keep repeating, is that with the track, it's a very consistent corner. Your brain processes what your traction limits are based on the temperatures, whether it be surface temperature and tire temps and, the limitations of that tire on that day. So once you go through it once or twice, you kind of process like, okay, I've got that. And now it just means now finding the best line based on that and speed to get through the corner. So yes, that's how it works.
That makes total sense. So it's still pretty common in my riding career to have a day where one or two times I might go through a corner and feel like I'm about to truly screw up, and I don't, and it works out okay. Does that ever stop?
Does it ever stop? Yes, it definitely does. So, again, I would just keep repeating, the more times that you go through that corner and the more miles that you have under you, especially as a newer rider on the same bike, that comfort level will just continue to grow and grow and grow as you ride, the more you ride. So I kind of am trying to reflect back on times when I first started street bike riding, and I can recall exactly that. Going through a corner at just being tense, and going through a corner at a speed to where later in life, say even 2 years later, I would ride through there and think, man, I can recall going through that corner tense and about half the speed that I just did, and now I'm going through at a much higher speed, and my heart rate's not even up. It's not even a concern. So yes, it does.
That's a comfort. It's funny that you mentioned tension, because this past season was for me when I first discovered that if my shoulders are tense, my shoulders and neck are tense, and my arms are kind of locked, that I'm going to have a really rough time with every corner. And if I can kind of force myself to relax, the bike is it's almost like horseback riding that way. And that is not something I've read a lot in books, this idea of kind of just being loose in the upper body.
Yes, that's again another thing. If I get to spend enough time with any one person working with them, is that once you get the technical aspects of riding and getting through the corner, at a point, if it's a track day, it's usually around midday. Then I start talking about just trying to loosen up on grip and just kind of ease your mind, because I'm sure you have read that the less you try, the faster you go. The less harder you try, I should say. So if you're hyper focused and really working hard at trying to complete it, it generally is a limitation. You're your own massive limitation on getting through it. And the more you relax, the easier it becomes. And that's true. It's very true.
Yeah, I think that's probably my main development objective right now. I had some work done on my Triumph last year by a guy who specializes in suspension modifications, and I had tried to do some things myself and just screwed it up, and the bike was treacherous as a result. And so he fixed it up, and he took it out on a test ride, and he came back, and the rear tire had I had also replaced the tires. The rear tire had absolutely no unscrubbed surface on it at all. Yes. And that experience for me was that said to me a lot about how the limits are further out than I think they are. But it was a real wake up call to how far from, kind of mastering this I might really be. So there's a corner that kind of haunts me near where I live, and there's a stretch of road that a lot of people go to ride bikes on. There's probably 50 turns in the space of 18 kilometers or so, which for around here is a twisty road. And This is pretty straight. It's a 90-degree turn, no camber either direction. The sight lines aren't bad, and there's a skid mark that goes for about 70 feet straight off the end of the road, and it's clearly a motorcycle. What do you think this guy did wrong?
It's called twofold. Clearly, riding at a speed, way over his or her head, and then is the next major thing again that you probably read over and over is a great old thing called target fixation. So usually in those situations, what happens to 99% of us is you're going at a speed, just might be you just feeling good. And, the bike's talking to you and the road's talking to you that day and you're feeling good about it. And, you're going at a speed that you've never traveled on a road that maybe you have traveled, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a corner and say, oh no. And what typically happens, and earlier on I found myself doing it at a pretty early age to where it was told to me like this, pretty much wherever you choose to look is exactly where you're going to go. So if at that moment that person said, well, I'm going to crash, so where should I crash? And I bet you if you could replay that scenario and talk to them as it happened, that's exactly what happened. So, speed, committing to either making the corner or not. And that's a tough one because you're talking milliseconds, right?
Yeah.
If it's a situation that you are figuring, I may or may not make it through this, always try and bet on the side that you will. And for those that chose that not to, again, always try and keep your eyes on the road. And if you do, again, the probabilities are very high that you'll stay on. Now, you may run wide. There's a lot of situations that could be equally as detrimental, but in general, if you just always kind of focus on staying on the road and always looking where you want to go, even if it's a situation where, you feel as though you can't. That also applies on the street heavily in situations to where cars pull out on you or something's in the road. I mean, that's the type of thing to where, again, if you're reading on this over and over and over again, that you hear when cars pull out, first of all, they say, well, I didn't see you. Okay, obvious. So the next part is, if that happens, and what I do, if a car pulls out in front of me, I'm always trying to process, number one, I look at every car as though they're going to pull out in front of me. So it doesn't matter if they're on the side of the road. I just say, yep, they're going to, and if they don't, great, it's a good day. But what I always process to do is, where do I go if they do? And so, whether it's behind them, if it's safer to, if there's a divided median turn lane, then possibly I end up in there. But those are the situations that, if you think of ahead of time, certainly help. And that applies to the trek, as well. But that's the thing, and that goes all the way back to that corner with the big long skid mark on it. It's just inexperience, far too much speed, and then target fixation. So there's your three.
Yeah, that sounds like those are worth writing. Those are worth writing down. It's funny, you said that if you get yourself into that situation, you should probably always bet that you're going to make it, as opposed to bailing out on the corner. And then a little while later, when you were talking about cars, you said that you always assume they're going to do the worst thing. You can see why this is all a bit Zen to me, right? Because those are like completely opposite worldviews.
Yes.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it seems like faith is, certainly in the case of that corner with the skid mark, faith would have possibly saved that guy a bad day. Do you still have puckering moments sometimes?
I would have to say, at this point in my life, the only puckering moments that I would have that I'm recalling are just in situations on the surface. 9 out of 10 times, it's going to be in a corner, and it's going to be out here diesel or antifreeze or some slippery surface that's just going to, you can never predict it. So if I have a pucker moment per se, that would be it. But I can tell you how I process it, where I'm at in my riding life and career right now, is that you get past, once you get so many miles under you, you start equating that type of thing, obviously as a risk that you're taking at riding, right? But
right.
I find those situations that cause most people that pucker moment as an annoyance. So, I hit it. If I hit, diesel or coolant in a corner, which thankfully hasn't happened a great deal in the last 20 years, but when I do, I just react in the sense of, hopefully I can keep it up. And, I slide, and if I successfully make it, which thankfully I have most of the time, that irritates me. That's the outcome of it. It's like, I'm in it, it happens, I react to it, and then I'm annoyed by it. So I think that most people, newer riders, probably, or if they hear that, know that the more you ride, that you will get to that point to where it's not, and reacting in a way of, the term puckering, again, just brings in all of those scenarios of the worst possible things that you can do. Again, if you pucker, you're going to tense up, you're going to target fixate, and that will most likely end up in a bad result.
Right. Right. So at the end of the day, half the battle really is mental, maybe more than half.
Yes. Yep.
That sounds like kind of brilliant advice, to be honest with you. I'm as I say, I went into this kind of thinking I can teach myself by reading books, and then I'll go out and try this stuff. But in a lot of what you're saying really is experiential, as opposed to being a matter of principle that you can learn. So it all comes back to seat time.
Yeah, it definitely does, and I think one of the points that I was going to touch on with you, if you're in a location that you can, if you have a lot of open land that you're allowed to ride, pick up a small, literally a small, very small dirt bike, and even a grass field, and just set up your phone in record mode, and just ride in a circle, and lean the bike over as far as you think. And again, if you come back and replay it, I think that you'll see that it feels like you're leaned over a whole lot further than you really are.
Yeah.
And when I was teaching on a dirt track, I've taught a few friends a little bit about dirt track racing, and that's one of the first drills I have them do is just put their foot on the ground and ride in a small, tight of circle as they're comfortable with, and with speed, increase the speed, and with increased speed comes increased lean. And I have them go, and then I either will take a photograph or a video and show them, and they always look and say, wow, I'm not leaned over at all. I felt like I was, really leaned over. And then I will, they'll step off the bike, I'll step on, and I can, within one revolution, I can put the handlebar within 6 inches of the ground and ride in a circle. And that, I hope, equates to just showing people, much like, going through a turn fast on the street, that bikes are capable of a lot more than people will allow them to be. And so, it's the funny irony. I'm sure you've seen even some of the YouTube videos of racetracks where the racers fall off and the bike keeps going. So
yeah.
It's like it's the person on the bike that causes all the problems, and that's kind of true. So, but yeah, it always literally circles around, and I'm sure that's many things that you've probably read about, whether it be, I'm not a big sports guy, but I've heard this over and over again, whether it be golf, tennis, anything like that. And you can read and watch videos, your entire lifetime. It's not going to make you a better player. So it's kind of the same with bikes, just getting out there and doing it. And I will state this, don't ever let anyone tell you that the way that you do it and what makes you comfortable is wrong. Because I've heard that so many times over the years, and that it really hits me in a sense that that basically is a very discouraging way, to tell someone about something that, especially motorcycling, whether or not you use it for transportation or for fun or sport. To me, it is a fun sport. So anything that takes away from it being fun, whether it be words or anything else, just to me is the wrong direction to go. So I always say what I said earlier, when people start trying to tell you how you're riding the bike is, you shouldn't do that, do this. Well, again, look at the MotoGP top 10 guys. If you haven't, just, record one of those races and watch it, and even put it in slow motion for the 10 guys go through a corner. They're all in a different position on the bike, but they're all getting through the corner extremely successfully, and an amazing speed and everything else. So, every rider has his own comfort zone, and it's just whether, how much time that you get in order to, push on whatever it is that you want to do with it. But the most important thing is just to keep it fun. It just, if it stops being fun, then try something else. That's what I say.
I love that, because it links directly to confidence and to staying loose. Like it's not an empty piece of advice. I see the sense in that totally.
Yes.
Is a low side really better than a high side?
Yes, because As you'll probably hear over and over and over again, it's not the falls that hurt you, it's the sudden stops.
Right.
So, so I probably have been on the ground, street and or racing meaning, almost always at probably well over 100 miles per hour, countless times. And, if you're in a corner and you're leaned way over and your front end slides out, well, you're kind of already on the ground. So, that's another thing that you learn, again, unfortunately, with seat time and experiences, you learn how to crash. so low side, the further you're leaned over, if and when the time unfortunately comes that you are exiting the bike, if you're already on the ground, then it's just a matter of sliding. And hopefully that doesn't mean that anything stops you suddenly.
Yeah.
Because that's the hurt. So high side is the equation of, being tossed, standing on the top of your car at 60 and jumping off of it, jumping up in the air to jump off the car. It's kind of that same experience. So you're dealing with the impact, of your body to the ground. And then in addition with speed, and with all of that usually comes tumbling if you have watched any racing videos. So all of that's bad. So yes, low speed's the way to go if you have to go. But what you'll learn, and I don't know if you've read this, it's an interesting phenomenon even to talk about it, that you learn in racing when you get to the higher levels. Knee on the ground type of riding, and I don't do it on the street at all, but on the racetrack, early on when you start racing, it's kind of, I tell people it's like your knee is kind of your lean indicator.
Right.
So, you kind of put your knee out, and if you're comfortable with a certain lean angle, especially if that means if your knee touches down, you can pretty quickly get to that level of, lean as your comfort zone. What happens is as you accelerate up, in the pro level racing, you become to master traction. And in that term, what happens is that your knee actually is your third point of contact of the bike. And so there's been many times, and every top racer will tell you this, and I've been fortunate enough to experience it, myself, is that you can literally go through a corner with both tires sliding right at the traction limits, and the only thing that's keeping you really upright is your knee.
Wow.
So you and the bike are sliding on your knee. Your knee is what's holding you up. And, again, it's all, your mind is an amazing computer. You can process all of that in micro milliseconds as to what's happening as you feed, depending on, more throttle, more brake. What do you need to do as you and the bike are all sliding across the road? So that's kind of, the thing. What I rely on more on street bikes is the actual physical limitations of the bike. So street bikes, which is what I choose to ride on the street instead of, sports bikes, which are worthy of saying this too. I said a lot lately in my conversations. It used to be referenced 70s and 80s and even 90s. Motorcycles were, even if they were fairly sporting bike, they were primarily built as a machine that was focused to transport people on public streets. So what happened in the 2000s, early mid 2000s and all the way up to current days are anything that, is in the sport bike category is a purpose-built race bike for the track that people choose to ride on the street. And to me, that takes out the fun in it, because people that know my background and ask me, what do you ride? And I always say, you won't believe what's in the garage now. And they say, why? And I'm like, I don't own any sport bike whatsoever, which they're always kind of baffled on. And I'm like, I don't want to have to ride a modern sport bike. For me to ride it and enjoy it means that I'm running it at a race pace, and I don't want to do that on the street. So to come back to riding I choose Gootsy. Gootsies are just amazing road bikes, and the reason is because they've been built for forever, first and foremost as a street machine. And within arguments, a lot of the European brands that aren't sport bikes, clearly Ducati and BMW and things like that, they're kind of more focused on street road bikes. And so what happens with those is they don't care about max lean angles. So when I say I'm, leaning on the limitations of the bike. You know, I don't know if your bike, I'm sure it does, under the foot peg is a little nub that's replaceable,
Yep.
a little feeler. And so once you get comfortable with your bike, then you learn, and that little feeler, that little nub, or whether it's that or kickstand or, you know, things drag on bikes, those kind of become your knee as far as your lean angle sensor. And, you know, for the longest time, that's what I used to do on my first Gucci, was just the pegs were the limitation. So I could come up to a corner and just put it right on the peg, because I knew that was the limitations of me for the street, and I could just run it, you know, pretty much run it that way. So
Mine are all still in perfect shape, but, you know, talk to me in a year, I guess. Well, listen, Todd, this has been fantastic. I could keep you on the phone for hours, but I don't think that would be probably fair to anybody. And I love ending on this idea of keeping it fun. It is easy
Yes.
to take this too seriously, and I can see now how that's probably not going to be your friend skills wise. So thanks for coming on the show,
Of course, my pleasure.
and we'll see you in February.
Sounds great. We'll see you then.
All right, take care, man. The really sensible advice about getting comfortable with corners is what all the experts tell you, and it's pretty solid. Get training, do track days. If you have somewhere to ride it, maybe buy a dirt bike. But Todd's personal take comes from a deeper place that I can't help but think has something to do with learning to do this before you're old enough to doubt yourself. Here's what stuck with me. Ride lots, have fun, and always bet you're going to make it. It's funny how much of this is really about not hanging on so tightly, about mastering it by doing it, and about not overthinking things, which is a thing I do. Learning to ride like a 4-year-old sounds like the way to win that war between your brain and your instincts, no matter how old you actually are. Ride lots, have fun, always bet you're going to make it. I think I might just write that on my gas tank. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. If you have comments or suggestions, you can always reach me at thismotorcyclelife@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram. I'm at thismotolife. And a website complete with show notes is coming soon. Really, I promise. To take us home, here's a recommendation for your This Motorcycle Life playlist. The song is called Cow, and the artist is a young Parisian musician named Antoine Mallier. My wife discovered this guy on SoundCloud. She doesn't ride, but she told me that this track is what she imagines a winding road feels like on a motorcycle. I think she's right. The music is full of anticipation, but with just a little menace in the background to keep you humble. I don't know about you, but that pretty much nails it for me. Check it out however you like to get your music. In the meantime, thanks for listening. Keep staying alive out there.